bring joy through photography to beautiful humans. I am immersed in photography education, and I offer photography training through workshops, walks, courses, one-to-one tuition, online and in person. And I actually teach in community education as well. Alongside, I actually have my own photography business where I photograph portraits of people, and weddings, events, branding photography. I'm kind of open to it all. So you'll notice, those of you that have seen, I've got some links in the chat, those of you that are just joining. There's some people get a little bit confused. You've got two links there, which is my photography sort of education and my photography spirit site, which is photo education, and then I have my photography, which is portraiture. So you can join both, you get a sense of kind of all the aspects that I do. So that's a little bit about me, everybody. As I said, I have put the links in the chat, and there should be a link to a mailing list for the cyanotypes if you really enjoy what we go through today. If not, I know some people weren't getting access to them. I am sending a PDF out afterwards with all the information, all that key information that I go through today with you all. So yeah, don't feel like you need to, if you're like me, I mean, I always have a notepad and pen, but you don't need to scribble everything down because you'll get lots of lovely information. Yes, in the PDF afterwards, which I'll send out with the recording, everyone. Okay, so what I'd like to do, actually, I think we are, I haven't got you all muted. What I'm going to do, everyone, is I'm just going to mute everybody. Bear with me a second, everyone. Sorry about that, everyone. I've got slightly different, slightly new setup, so it's just. Okay, everybody. So you are all muted at the moment, but what I would say is just towards the end, if you do have anything that you want to say in the chat, then obviously pop any questions in, and then we can have a little look at them at the end of it, and you can ask me some questions as well. I'm going to end a few minutes beforehand, so we can, you can ask away, okay? And I can see most of you, I know some of you have, taken your videos off, but I can see you, so you can kind of wave at me as well. And I'll just check in with you as well as we go along. Okay, so let's get started, everybody. And also, I just wanted to say how amazing we are. We're having a lovely cyanotype course on World Photography Day. Who knew? I completely forgot that it was going to be World Photography Day today, but I think that's pretty special. And I don't know where you all are, but it's beautiful sunshine, which is lovely, and that would be perfect for cyanotypes. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so today what we're going to be exploring, we're going to look at what is a cyanotype. Okay, and I'm going to just go through a brief history, and then we're going to look at technique, equipment, and instructions. So it is going to feel like an instructional video today, but hopefully I've got lots of visuals in there for you all. So yeah, hopefully it won't be, there's not lots of text, and it should make sense to you all. And also I have, we'll go through looking at digitizing a cyanotype. So, we have that other element to it. And then we're going to end today on ideas, inspiration, and intention. Okay, so let's jump on. So what is a cyanotype? So cyanotypes are lensless photography. We're using UV light to expose the print. Cyanotypes use iron-based salts, and that's potassium ferricyanide and ferric ammonia citrate. And that gives us these lovely blue images. Ultimately, we are using a little bit of chemistry. I don't know how many of you have got a film background. It'd be quite interesting to know. I mean, you can kind of obviously, maybe just towards the end, let me know, or just put a yes in the chat if you do have a film background. So it kind of, obviously links with the traditional element of photography. Cyanotypes are experimental, which is just fantastic. We get to have a really, play and see where we can take it. No. It's unique. Sorry, I'll just mute. Just everybody, just be, if you can, when you come in, those of you, if I'm just admitting you, if you can just mute yourselves, that'd be great. Thank you. So it is unique. You can't always guarantee the results of what you're going to get. And it's really creative. You can be as creative as you want to be with it, which is just fantastic. They are classed as, you may have heard some of the words like sun prints, because we are using the sun to expose the print. And also, you may have heard photograms, which is just simply, all that means is that we are using shadows and, or we're creating shadows and silhouettes with objects. That's all a photogram is. It is permanent, so some techniques that are using kind of similar process, they're not always permanent. So, but this one is. And I think the best thing about this is that we're going to get prints at the end of it, which, all of us, I'm sure, do a lot of digital photography. And as brilliant as that is, then we just don't have the print at the end of it unless we, physically make the effort to print. So you will have a really beautiful print at the end of it. Okay, so if we look back just at a little bit of history, the technique itself was developed in 1842 by Sir John Herschel. It was actually the botanist, and I imagine a lot of you have heard of this name, but it was actually the botanist Anna Atkins who produced and illustrated a book of British algae using the cyanotype process in 1843. So that's pretty quick that she, jumped on and realised how good this technique would be. At the time, how inexpensive it was and the ease of use just meant that cyanotypes were quickly taken up, and it's part of the reason why Anna Atkins used it. But it was also used by architects for the architectural plans, hence the term blueprint. I just wanted to make a note about the blue. The Prussian blue was made by the colour master Diebeck in 1704, and it became available to artists in 1724. So it's quite special to think that we're using that technique that, was created all those years ago and is still really popular, and actually I think has stood the test of time, which is amazing. And Anna Atkins actually went on to, over the 10 years, she created 3 volumes of illustrated books using the cyanotype process. She was also the first person to illustrate a book with photographic images. So I quite like that idea of the fact that obviously the cyanotype was used for books. And maybe I would encourage all of you, if you I hopefully from today, you'll be all for cyanotypes. Start thinking about the books that you could create with your cyanotypes. That's a little bit of inspiration. I think that would be an amazing way to go with it. Okay, so let's have a little look. So jumping on to our technique, the technique itself is really easy. It's going to be quite straightforward, everyone. Once I've given you kind of the how-to, it is fun, I think, personally. And you will find it, those of you who are used to that sort of digital photography process, you will find it slower. We do have to give it time for it to expose, but actually there's something really, really lovely in that slower process. And those of you that have got a film background, and if you enjoyed film, because I've heard lots of people say I hated the darkroom, but if you did enjoy that process, it will take you back to that. I suppose it would be what we would call now is quite a mindful practice, because you are completely in the moment with it, observing and, looking and considering about how you need to adjust your prints. So, I personally think it is a really lovely process, but you will find it a little bit slower. There's a few methods that we can use with the technique. I'm going to talk you through the paint method today, but there's also a dip method. It sounds very technical, but it is literally just dipping your paper in the solution. And then there's also a rod technique as well, which is just, I would imagine a little bit similar to almost screen printing. It's very environmentally connected. And as we go through the presentation today, I think you'll get a real sense of that. And if any of you have just started out with the technique or had a little go with it, then obviously you kind of be aware of that. So I think it is pretty, it is quite an economic, you can make it as cheap as or as expensive as you want it to be. I'm somebody who loves a bit of DIY, so I'm going to give you DIY options. But yeah, so it's totally up to you kind of how much you invest. I suppose the biggest investment is your time, everyone. So it is versatile. There's lots of different places that you can take this technique. And you can also apply it to a whole range of different materials, which is fantastic. So I think from today, once you start experimenting, you can start to consider, oh, I could do this with it, or I could do, and that's exactly how I felt when I started with the technique. You do still need to consider composition, everyone. I think, and just play with that as well. But I would say for the technique to begin with is just to keep it really simple. I think like most things in photography, sometimes we just need to simplify it before we complicate it. So yeah, I would keep your compositions really simple, but do play around with them a little bit. Okay. So let's have a little look at some visuals, everyone, and some examples. So we're sticking with technique at the moment. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you some visuals, and then I'm going to jump on to kind of how, our equipment and how we're going to do this. So the key thing here is if you want to have a really sharp outline, you want to make sure that your object is as flat to the surface as possible. So anybody with flower presses out there? Brilliant, fantastic. You do want to flower press. Those of you that are going to use more natural based objects that you can obviously press, it will give you a really nice, clear, sharp outline. Okay. Paint effect. Now, like I said, I'm going to show you the paint method today. So actually, artists, in the group, if you love kind of, if you've got sort of a certain way that you like to sort of paint, you can experiment with that and you can play around with it. So you don't have to have a completely full piece of paper. And I think that's what's really nice about it, is you can completely adapt it to your style and the way that you want to present your I was going to say photograms, because they are photograms. You notice on this one, in comparison to the other one, we've got more of a tonal kind of shade happening, and that's because it is not completely flat. and you know, they've just been sort of laid on top, so you're getting you know, you're getting this more sort of a bit of a tonal variation, and you can see that the outline isn't as sharp. But actually, I think there's something really nice about that quality. So, you know, again, just to kind of have a little look and sort of play around with it. Again, another variation of the fact that I haven't completely, I've just literally laid, this is a fennel head, and I've just laid it gently on top. So I haven't pressed it against the material at all. So you get this lovely, again, it's just a really nice variation of blue. And again, you know, just the strokes. Now you will notice as well, I don't know if anybody is kind of observing that just towards the outer edge, that you're getting some darker shades of blue where I've painted. That's where the emulsion is just starting to pool a little bit. I will talk about that in a little while about sort of technique. But if you do notice that when you do start to experiment, you're getting that, it just means that it's slightly uneven. But actually that might be the result, or you know, something that you would like to get. Texture. Okay, so the other really key thing here is different papers. So this is where the experimentation is really really interesting, because you can choose the different papers that you you know, want to experiment with. So you could go for something that is much more textured, and I think you should hopefully on your screens be able to see that there is more texture within this one, because it is more of a textured paper, and obviously then your results will be different. Why not experiment with water? So this is simply, this was put outside, it was raining. I felt like it was like light rain, so I felt like I needed to add to the paper. So I did throw some more water on. And this is just literally a playful piece of work, but it's really interesting to see the types of results that you can get. So simply just water and playing around with that. And actually, I really like the way the whiter areas is where the water is pooled, but I think actually that gives a really interesting effect of almost sort of, you know, clouds and then sort of rain. So you could really, yeah, you know, you could play with that, and you could combine it as well with doing sort of a photogram. This is again, I feel as though I am sharing with you my a kitchen side unit. It isn't. Or worktop. It is simply I've just put this out on a like on a clothesline at an angle, and then it's just literally rained on the actual paper. So you're getting these lovely sort of little kind of yeah, variations of flecks, and obviously the rain was pretty continuous. But really interesting that you could get that, as even those of you that are kind of more of a maybe textile based artists, that you can get these kind of patternings happening. So I mentioned the technique being really easy, and I wanted to take this photograph as my own, but actually this is my 3.5-year-old's cyanotype. So I mean, obviously he did have a little bit of help, but they're his brush strokes, and this is a piece of hardened like seaweed that we had collected from the beach. So he chose his object, and you can see again that you've got that sort of varial tone where it's not actually completely pressed onto the material. So he found it really exciting to do, and really enjoyed sort of the result. So it's, yeah, you know, it is as simple as you want it to be, but it can also be as complicated as you want it to be as well. And I think also quite interesting about this is that so I feel as though this is the first cyanotype that he made. So he's already in training as a photographer, but also that he the object that he used was the first object he collected on his first holiday by the beach. So, you know, you can start to already think about the objects that you might cyanotype and how they might have an importance or a significance to cyanotype. Okay, moving on, everybody. Now, you know, you could, you know, like I said, this is fun. It's, you know, it's about playing. So you could also use any kind of object. It doesn't have to be, I would predominantly use probably kind of florals. That is my sort of natural area. But, you know, why not use sort of objects that, you know, mean something or you feel are quite playful. So this is just a hammerhead shark, not a literal one, everybody. But I really love actually the way that I've placed it. And then you've got this really nice sort of shadow area happening just over here. So it's as though, and again, thinking about composition, you know, thinking about placement to give it a sense of movement. And a little dinosaur for everybody. So in regards to the technique as well, you can go through, you can start to push it further. And this is a wet process technique. I will talk about that in a little while as well. It's wet processing and it's salting the paper as well. And you're starting to get then a really interesting technique happening. And I mean, I really love, you know, the results that you can get with playing around with wet processing and toning. And we will be going on, we will be delivering toning in 24. So in 2024. And the other exciting thing, everybody, we can actually print negatives. And I think that then starts to open up the technique to a whole other level and can be really interesting. I think, and again, we'll talk about this a little bit later on, but, you know, you do want to be thinking about the negatives that you are choosing, you know, thinking about obviously the blue tone and the fact that you can use those textured papers. So I would consider and think about the negatives that you choose. And, you know, you can do it again. You know, this one obviously is a full bleed. But then we've got one where I've just done again some brush strokes and then only partially exposed the negative. And, you know, you could also go with kind of doing something a little bit more formal for those of you. I do tend to go kind of, you know, more creative, but it could be just a completely straight print as well. Okay. Is that all right with everybody so far? Yeah, good. Brilliant. Oh, I'm getting some lovely nods. Thank you, everyone. Right, so I'm going to stick on this just for a few minutes. Now, again, you, those of you, I know some of you have sort of joined a little bit later. And just a reminder, this is being recorded, and also I'm going to be sending a PDF with all of this information out to you. Okay, so this is just really more for me to go through just some key things that I want you to be aware of. So equipment wise, so today I'm going to go through with you how to use a quicker Cyanotype sensitizer set, which is the Jacquard Cyanotype sensitizer set. It's brilliant and really easy to use, so it's a really good starting point. We've got beautiful, well, I'm here in the Midlands, everybody, and we've got some beautiful sunshine today, perfect Cyanotype weather, but, you know, we are obviously kind of about to go into more of our, dare I say it, colder months. So you may want to invest in a UV light. I will recommend, again, in the PDF, I've got a link for you all of a lamp that I suggest to you. It was £26. You know, it's not, you're not going to, you know, have to really invest, and it works really effectively. So a UV light. A couple of key things in regards to brushes, I would suggest that you use a medium hake brush. So the one that was originally recommended to me was the Ron Ranson medium hake brush. So this is goat hair, and it just makes the application much smoother, and therefore the results are more effective. So I would really, and it is actually a beautiful brush to use, so I highly recommend it. But just in recent research and a little bit of exploration, Dale Rowney actually also do a hake brush, and that's a little bit cheaper. So you know, if any of you have a hobbycraft nearby, pop down there. I think they've got also a bit of a sale on at the moment, so well worth investing in. Some weighing scales to measure out your chemistry. Those of you, I'm going to give you some of the, you're going to have a ratio of using the, you know, the chemicals if you buy them separately. You don't buy the sensitizer set. And so if you do that, you will want some dark bottles for chemical storage. In regards to that, what I would do is just pop down to your local chemist, and you can buy a dark bottle from them, and they're fairly cheap. Protective gloves, that's quite important. It is quite important in the sense that the chemicals irritate. Those of you with good observation skills will notice as we go through that Hannah did not use gloves. So do as I say, not as I do. It's yeah, it's, I think it's a tradition. It goes back. I always used to get told off when I was at college for not using gloves. So, but yeah, please do use gloves. And you do want a dish for chemical application as well. Any of the materials that you do use for cyanotype printing, everyone, don't reuse them for any of the food purposes. You want a light proof dark bag. So the best way of doing this is that you actually apply the chemical to quite a few sheets of paper and then dry those, and then you've got them for going back to, they last for about 6 months once they're dry. So you do want to store them, because then, you know, you're going to speed up your process when you are cyanotype printing, because you're not going to have to do the application. So you do want a light proof dark bag. Those of you that do any experimenting with traditional film papers, you normally have a dark bag with those. So if you've used up the paper, then just save the dark bags. If not, if this is the first time you've done anything like this, I just use some packing bags, you know, some packaging bags. Those of you that like to do a bit of selling on eBay or, you know, anywhere else, just some packing bags. And then I also just stored it in like a brown enveloped A4 thing, just to make sure it is completely light tight. A contact printer, which or glass. Now, the contact printers, again, if you come from a film background, you'll be aware of contact printers. They were brilliant, everybody. They just literally, I don't know if you can see my sort of hands, but basically it has a little bit of foam on it and a clip, and it just means that it really squashes whatever you're using down really tightly. So it works really well. If you haven't got access to contact printers, I've had a little look, everyone. They are quite expensive. I think they're quite sought after. But if not, you can just make your own version, and you can see on the right hand side, if I just wave my sort of arrow, I've just used some spring clamps here with some glass, and then just put some card behind it. Simple. Okay, so, you know, don't worry about it if you don't have a contact printer. Scissors, and then, like I said, varied textured watercolor paper. I don't think I go. I've in the PDF, I've given you some suggestions. So again, for me, we've got kind of a Hobbycraft nearby, and they had a really lovely range of different papers. Just any art supplier, but I would suggest go in, have a little feel of the papers, and get a sense of what you might want to be using. I've tended to go for a 300 GSM because it's just a little bit thicker. And again, in the PDF, I just refer to some of the, you want an acid-free paper. And you also ideally want it to be hot pressed, not cold pressed. Yeah, and then just have a little go. And there's some really beautiful little like, and it's watercolor paper that you want to go for. But you can get some like little A5 sized or little postcard sized paper as well. So I think that's quite exciting. So I'm giving you all permission to just go and enjoy buying paper. So hairdryer, I want to speed up the process for everybody. Okay, so just a hairdryer on a cool setting, it just dry your prints really quickly. Please make sure you cover all of your surfaces. The chemicals can stain, and flower press, everybody, and objects for printing, of course, and then some pegs and a clothesline. So just a little note on mixing chemicals, and then I'm just going to show you some visuals, everyone, because I know that was quite a bit of information that I gave you there. So the Jacket Cyanotype sensitizer set, it literally comes with 2 bottles, and those 2 bottles are A and B, okay? And all you're going to do is you're going to fill both of those bottles all the way to the top with water, and then you're going to mix equal parts together, okay? So you'll fill them with water. Once you've done that, I would leave them for 24 hours just to make sure that they have mixed and combined and settled. And then the next day, you're just literally going to get A and B, and you're going to mix those 2 together in that little kind of container, just a little plastic container, so that you can then paint that on. Now, what was I going to say about that? Mixing together, you don't need to mix much. You think you do. I would probably do 15 mils of each. I think probably about 30 mils, and it will go quite a distance for you. You can buy the following chemicals. I'm not going to go through the formula. I've popped this in the PDF for everybody, but there is a formula there for you, okay? And just actually going back on the previous slide, for those of you may have noticed a little book. I'm just going to hold up a book. This is Blueprint to Cyanotypes, really worth getting, and I think that has some formula mixes ratios in there for you as well. So this is a really good book to get. I think that is worth the investment. But most of what I talk about, today is in that book. So but in my style. Okay, so let's have a little look at the application and what we're doing. You want to apply your emulsion, because that's ultimately what you're creating. You want to apply that under tungsten light or in a darkened room. So all I simply did was close the curtains and covered any kind of light areas that I thought, would obviously impact on the solution. Once you've mixed the solution, then it's sensitive to light, okay? And once you have mixed the solution, it will only be stable for probably around, I think it's like 4 to 6 hours. So it's not worth keeping, okay? And here we go. So application, everybody. You want to do lovely sort of lovely brush strokes horizontally across your paper. You don't need a lot on your brush at all. You can see there I haven't got a lot of mix in the container. So horizontally, just make sure that you aren't putting too much on your brush, and then you want to go vertically across. And what that will do is it will just give you much more of a kind of even tone, and you won't get lots of different patches. Works really effectively. And I am a faffer when I brush, just generally, so you may have a quicker technique than me, but that's, you know, simply just want to make sure that you haven't got any areas that have pulled together. Okay, so once you have applied your emulsion, you're then just going to dry with your hairdryer, and you're going to do that on a cool setting, everyone. And you can see I'm doing quite a few at the same time. Generally, the watercolor pads are about 12 to 15 sheets. I would do all of them. And you know, you might want to vary your technique and do kind of a little bit of a mix, some where they're full papers and then some where they're just partially done, just so you've got a little bit of a, yeah, you know, you've got some different effects to play around with. So cool setting, do make sure they're completely dry. And then once you've done that, just store them in that paper that I was talking about, you know, in your light type bag. And then when you come along to actually expose the print, then use your handmade contact printer or your actual contact printer. Make sure it's clamped down nicely. And that is if you're using, you know, you want that really nice, crisp, sharp edging. There's a couple of options here. Okay, so from a traditional photographer point of view, if we're going to do things properly, everybody, you do probably want to make yourself a test strip. Okay, so let's have a little look at what a test strip looks like. Okay, so a test strip, simply all that will do is it will give us an idea about the time that you're going to expose your print for. Why is a test strip useful? Because you could spend 5 prints trying to get the exact exposure and then you've wasted all of that paper, or you just do it with this one test strip. Really useful, okay? You're going to do your test strip in increments of 2 minutes or 5 minutes. Now, you want to use a thick card as you go down. So if I go back, can you just see everybody just on this side? I've got quite a thick card. With the 2 minutes, then you just do lovely little strips, okay, as you go down the print. And that's why you're getting this effective result. I started from the top, okay, and then just went down in 2 minutes increments. And you can see I've got my timing set here. So obviously by the time I got to the bottom, I was only exposing the bottom for 2 minutes. And that's why then it just, you know, we go back 2 minutes, 4, 6, and you can see the lighter going through to the dark. Does that make sense to everybody? I'm getting a few nods, so that's fantastic. Okay, right now, just from a kind of printing point of view, okay, overexposure is when it's too dark. And you probably want to head towards more overexposure, especially with the photograms, because you get much more definition in your print. And if you have a little look on this side where it is lighter, that's then you've got that underexposure happening. All right, so we haven't got enough light happening. And again, you haven't got as much definition as what you do towards kind of, you know, the top. If I have a bit of a mix in me, everybody, I am both impatient and patient. But if you are kind of edging towards impatience and want to kind of do this quicker, I have got some quick tips for you. In the UK, on a sunny day, 15 to 20 minutes, I'd say, on average, to do your exposure. If it's cloudy, I would allow for half an hour. You probably will get something within 20 minutes, but I think 30 minutes is a good, you know, a good place to expose for. But you can play with it, you know, you can have a little explore yourselves, but, you know, like I said, if you are like me and do want it to speed up a little bit. The UV lamp then is 10 minutes. So it's a bit of a difference. 10 minutes and you're going to get a good print. Okay. So just a little look at, as I said, you can tell I'm a bit of I am DIY. So we've got a mixture of a contact printer here, and also just my kind of homemade one, you know, again, like to speed up the process. Why not do 2 at the same time? this is what it's going to look like. You want to have your print so it's perpendicular to the sun, okay? So they are literally, it's going to get the best exposure then. Once you have exposed it for your amount of time, then you're going to wash the print for, I would say, around 10 minutes, but ultimately what you're looking for is that you've washed all of the excess chemicals off, okay? And this should play, so you can have a little look. This is where the magic happens, everybody. It doesn't matter how many times you've done this, it still feels special as you see it change colour. I love this part. So you can see it's going to go from this kind of, I'll show you an example in a minute. But yeah, it will go from like this sort of browny kind of colour, and then you start to really see this really beautiful blue. That will then darken a little bit as you dry it, okay? And then you're just going to peg it up and dry it, not in direct sunlight, everybody, okay? So just a note on the UV lamp. UV lamp wise then, everyone, I have put this link in for you. You want to create yourself probably a little light box. It just means obviously it contains the light and you're going to get more of an effective print. We've got a UV lamp, 30 watts. Create a little homemade light box for yourself. I've done a complete box, but you can do it where you can just, you could actually cut yourself a little opening and then pop your print in that way, okay? And then expose for 10 minutes. It seems to me, I think 10 minutes is a good exposure. Pre-fix. So what you're doing is when you're washing your cyanotype print, you're fixing it, okay? So before you've done that, you haven't fixed it, and therefore it's not permanent. So this is what the kind of result you're going to get with the pre-fix. I mentioned wet processing earlier. If you want to skip the whole drying process, why not apply the emulsion and then put your object on top and then basically expose it, as I've just said, through those tips. And what you'll do, it will take longer, everybody, it will take longer, just because obviously then you're kind of going to be, you're going to watch it sort of dry in the sun or through the UV light, but then you start to get some really interesting results, okay? That's the wet process. It's as simple as that. The only thing I would say is if you are using negatives or if you are using objects, you do want to be throwing them away afterwards, because obviously they have absorbed and taken on the chemical. So I mentioned, composition. Just recently, a lot of my cyanotypes, they are based around kind of just picking things from my garden and, just play around with how you want things to be positioned. That's part of, the experiment. This is what it will look like after you've exposed it. And then this is going to be kind of, your final result. So they're the sort of stages. So do play with composition, especially if you're using more than one object specifically. Yeah, and just enjoy that process. And I have to say, don't forget to frame it, everyone. Once you have done, your, lovely print, we want to get them in frames and get them up, especially if you're happy with them. Okay, so you're all still with me, which is great. Right, so we are kind of, we're moving towards the end now, everybody. Thank you for listening to a lot of information there, but just remember we are recording, and also you're going to have a lovely handy PDF at the end of this. Digitizing our cyanotypes. So even in this presentation, I've had to digitize those cyanotypes, and it's a really another exciting element to the cyanotype process. I use Lightroom. Ultimately, to digitize your cyanotypes, you want to have a scanner or camera. I have a scanner with my printer. It's straightforward. It works really easily. So I think scanners are really useful for this. Whatever software that you use, and a few things to experiment with are cropping, denoising if you want to try and get a bit more of a smoother result. Play around with white balance, your clarity and contrast, and you can also have a little play with the color panel. Just going to, okay, can you all see that? Okay, yeah, I'm getting some nods, brilliant. Okay, so like I said, I use Lightroom. So some of the kind of the quick tips of what I would do, this is just, it's scanned original document. The first thing I'm going to do is crop that. We'll just kind of play around a little bit with the angle. So I just want to show you it's kind of simple and straightforward. Can you see the mark? I mean, obviously you can't probably, these little marks, that's where I used the clamp, the spring clamps. So when you are, those of you making your makeshift contact printers, just be aware if you are using the spring clamps, they are going to, you know, just be aware about where they're placed. Okay. So I am still going to kind of play around a little bit with composition. Okay, happy with that. Okay, so some of the things we can do, I mean, you can use the healing brush if you felt like there was marks in there that you didn't like. You know, you can still use the healing tools or the clone tool, and especially if you've done clamp marks and you're not happy with them and you want to get rid of them. So that works really nicely. White balance. Now, obviously, we do love that blue, but you might actually want to play around with the variation of what that kind of color tone is. And you might want to, you know, create much more of a vivid look. Probably wouldn't go as extreme as this, everybody, but I'm just using this as an example to show you. You know, you could play around with your exposure if you did want to just, again, kind of get a little bit kind of creative. I find clarity is really nice for just sharpening up, you know, getting a little bit more definition and making it pop a little bit. So, you know, you could play with that, but you can see as I've moved the clarity up, we've got, you know, we're starting to see much more of this, the texture. But if I just show you as well, if you were to use, you know, the noise reduction, it will kind of sort of smooth things out a little bit for you. And also you have got that texture, the texture panel as well. So you know, you could play around with the texture there as well if you wanted to smooth it out. Okay. You might want to, those of you that want to see what, you know, what would toning do or what would be the results. Now, if like me, I tend to create my own presets, but as a kind of little bit of an experiment, you could use the presets that come with your software. And, you know, you've got probably a few options that you can play around with. You know, you could kind of go for a bit of a vintage style. You know, you could go for black and white as well. You know, you could turn this to black and white if you wanted to. Warm shadows, even like the aged photo as well, and get a little bit more of that sort of sepia tone happening within the image. So I would just say there's no right or wrong here. You know, I know sometimes we can get really kind of caught up in you know, rules and doing things in a certain way, but actually I think you'll learn through just creating and experimenting. So that's just a little idea of what you can do with Lightroom. And if you do create, if you do a preset on one of the cyanotypes, you know, make sure you save it, save that preset, you know, name it your kind of cyanotype, you know, whatever you want to call it, and then you've got it for the future when you do go and start to digitize the rest of your prints as well. Okay. Okay, and we're just going to jump back on to our presentation. Okay, so that's digitizing, everybody. And once you have done that process, you're just going to export it and print it like you normally would. And just a note, so I don't forget, those of you that really like the textured results, I've just recently discovered, some of you might already be on there and you might actually have alternatives, which is Permajet's Heritage collection. Really lovely digital textured paper. It's beautiful and it's matte as well, so really, really nice. So I would recommend you could use that. Okay, so just an example of, you know, some of the results that you can get when you're digitizing. So this was the original image on the left. And, you know, obviously I didn't quite like the composition, although now I look at it more, I do really like it. And I also like the clamp. I actually really like the fact that those clamps are in there too. It gives you a sense of the process in which I took to make the print. This was just scrap, like a sketchbook. I just ripped the paper out. I was really interested to see if it worked. So, you know, what have you got around the house paper-wise that you can use? But you can see then on the right-hand side, that's the digitized version, where I've just sort of played around with it and tweaked it a little bit. Okay. Okay, so we're moving into the final section, everybody. Ideas and inspiration. We've looked at, you know, the idea of the technique, and we've looked at how you're going to do that and the equipment that you're going to use. And I hope that already some of you, there's some ideas bubbling around of how you might use your cyanotypes, and you might have already done a little bit of research beforehand. But I think it's really worth just looking at others and looking at, you know, artists for some inspiration. So let's have a little look at what kind of things, where we can take this. This is Liz Harrington. Okay, and Liz Harrington, she actually used the cyanotype. So she's got the paper, and then she's taken it, she's done studies in the Suffolk coastline around coastal erosion. So she's just dipping her cyanotype in directly into the sea, and she's getting these types of results. And she's right along the, you know, sort of obviously on the coast, and she's getting those splash marks, and, you know, when it sort of brings up all those stones, etc. But wow, what, you know, really interesting results. You can be quite abstract with this. You don't have to be, you know, doesn't have to be so literal. Christina Chan and Itamir Freed. This is actually, it was the last time I visited RPS in Bristol in May, and this is in their entrance lobby. It's a beautiful, beautiful piece of work. They haven't actually put glass over the top of this, so you can really get a sense of the material that they've used. A collaboration. I love the fact that we've got those separate panels as well, and maybe that's something that you think about, where you could take your photography, you know, it really works, doesn't it? You've got individual images and then they interlink to create a whole image. But as you look at it, you assume, well, I assume that this is the same place. But actually what they've done is they've taken images from different places and combined them. So they've created, and they are playing with this idea of imagined reality, and also that play on kind of how maybe we store and create memories. So they're really a really interesting duo to have a little look at. But, you know, there's some really beautiful work. Melanie King is very interested and works mainly in sustainable practices. So she is using a lot of natural toners. As I mentioned, we are going to be bringing toning. I think I might have mentioned it. We're going to be doing another talk on toning in 2024, which I think will be really, really exciting. She's actually, I think, if I remember, I'm going to get this, but I think it was elderberries that she toned with. the results are really interesting and quite beautiful. And there is a sense of fragility as well with the technique. Susan Derget, some of you may have heard of her before. She, I think, is probably, if you have heard of her, is known for some of her sea-based prints. I mentioned scanning, and this is actually this is like scanner photography. So it's just thinking about where you can take the technique and how it will jump you off in different directions. But as I mentioned, the cyanotype technique really lends itself to, you know, environment and considerations of environment and life cycles. So here she's, you know, she's got a study of seeds and is thinking about that life cycle. And actually quite a few of the photographers that I've used here, a lot of their work is linking back to the pandemic, which is quite interesting, you know. So I would have a little look at Susan Derget as well, if that's the type of work that you're interested in. And just a sample of those of you, if you think, oh, I've heard of the name, this is sort of the work that she was kind of known for. I always remember seeing some of her work at the Eden Project, and it just looked beautiful. So these prints are actually, she's using photosensitive paper, and she is going out at night, and she is using she's using a combination of moonlight and a flash. She's submerging the paper in water, and then she is firing the flash really quickly, and these are the types of results that she's getting. How exciting is that, everybody? I feel as though we might all be going out and getting our photosensitive paper, or I might be hunting out mine and having a go with that. Catriona Dunnett, she is a local, I say local, she's local to Warwickshire. And this is actually a lumen print, which is, again, photosensitive paper. It's actually paper that's fogged, and fogged paper gives a very muted flat tone, which I think you can kind of, you know, that it's quite subdued, but really interesting. So she's playing with that and getting these sort of, you know, these results. And this particular, I think this series, she was looking at a garden that was, it was her family's garden, and I was just trying to think of a way of saying that. It was her family's garden, which actually got destroyed, and it was a garden that she used to play in as a child. And she basically went back to the site, and she could see things growing there that kind of linked back to the garden that she once played in. She's then chosen flowers and vegetables that were linked to that garden, and, you know, she's printing them, and she's looking at that idea of kind of memory and memories fading, you know, and exploring that with the technique. So another version, she, you know, I would definitely have a look at her, because she does quite a variation. I know this is very faint, everybody. This is an Cyanotype, and it's using, she's actually printing with natural dyes, so that's why it's so faint. And again, this idea of memory, this print is not permanent. So the Cyanotypes, they're not permanent, so they are really worth scanning in, and will fade over time. So she's using that idea of memory, and this was actually a series that she did around the kind of the pandemic, when she was discovering her local area on the walks that, you know, we could go on. And yeah, she's kind of playing with that idea of those memories fading. So really interesting, well worth having a little look at. And just a kind of, you know, heads up that we, you know, we also want to go and visit some really beautiful galleries. And the V&A now has its new photography centre. I don't know if anyone has been yet, but you know, they've got a series, you know, obviously looking at the history of photography, and there's some really lovely samples there. I haven't been personally, but, you know, well worth going to, everybody. So just a kind of final note then of thinking about inspiration and intention. I think the first thing I'd like to say is that, just play and experiment with the technique. But as you do that, I think you'll start to, explore and think about the subject. And from that, you can start to develop an intention with the work that you're creating. And I think intention is really important in the sense that it gives us direction and it gives us a journey to sort of to go on. So just some things to think about, which we've mentioned already, which is, what is a technique that we're using? It's, it's UV based, it's using the sun predominantly, and it's blue. So it does connect really strongly with the environment and the flora and natural world. That beautiful blue, there's some really lovely links to the sea and thinking about those ebbs and flows. And I think water, is a really interesting thing to explore with the cyanotypes. You could think about life cycles, and you could think about even the fragility of the technique. We mentioned time, and the process itself is a slower process, and that sense of it kind of, documenting time as you're exposing. So that might be something that you explore. There's a really nice link to memory as well. And like I said, with some of those techniques, if you jump onto the other techniques that actually, that idea of sort of fading, or even those kind of the unique prints, you're never going to get exactly the same print again, just even by the way that you created the brushstroke, or the particular light conditions that you are using. Cyanotypes naturally lend themselves to a kind of recording and documenting type of photography. That idea of cataloging. If we think back to Anna Atkins and how she used the technique to document a whole range of the algae and sort of natural plant world. So I think it really lends itself to that idea of anybody who's collectors, what could you print and collect and document, and then what could you put in a book. And I would say that then it lends itself to this idea of topographical kind of photography, a record of what you're seeing. And with the photograms especially as well, they're a direct print, and then again, like I said, with the negatives, you can go in a much more of a creative, expressive place, and especially when you start to tone. Okay, everybody, just the last few things, and then we are going to go to, and I've got some lovely sort of chats, and we'll have a look at those in a moment. Just in summary, everybody, I'd just like to say, please just explore and experiment, create with intention. Once you've done all of that, once you've had a little bit of an explore and an experiment, have fun doing it. Please be inspired by you, your surroundings and others. Refine, explore, and repeat. And then just finally, join me, everybody, just so I don't forget, and I'm going to pop this in the PDF, but we do have a lovely little kind of interactive session online. So join me on October the 14th for review, support and development. It would be lovely to see some of your results, everybody, that we could, explore, where you have taken it and what you've discovered. And then in 2024, we will be bringing to you negatives and toning for cyanotypes and more.